Greetings,
Is this the part
Hacksters! Welcome to... What's up?
My bad. My bad. I was just going to go. This is the part where I pick my nose. But you go ahead.
This is the part where we kick off the show. I'm sorry, we had a minute for that. You were supposed to get your water and pick your nose and find your coffee before we started this
I picked my nose 5 minutes ago.
For what it's worth, everyone, there's a delay after I hit the go live button before we actually go live. So I was waiting for the countdown. And all right, so hi, welcome to Hackster Café. It's my favorite part of the month where we talk to some people who are doing really cool stuff with electronics. And this week we've got Ben Eadie and Davis DeWitt. Davis is a special effects engineer. Ben lists himself on LinkedIn as a special effects designer, but also uses the term engineered. And I think that there's plenty to dig into there already. But hi, how's it going?
Good.
Good. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure. I'm winging it a little because I'm coming off of a conference, so I haven't had a chance to dig in as much as I'd like. But that means that I get to have this whole journey alongside all of you. And everyone, please drop your questions and comments in the chat. We can pull them up on the screen. We can bring them into the conversation. It's going to be awesome. We have two amazing people. And so, yeah, let's just kick off with that. So Engineered, I was just having a conversation with Lara and Sarah Grant about what we call ourselves. And I recently chose the term Renaissance nerd. I've heard creative technologist, and some people have a big spiel about what they say. What does engineered mean to you, Ben?
To me, it's just a matter of, I found that engineering can be somewhat, I don't know, it can be compacting, and you end up being in a box, and they'll say, what kind of engineering? Are you mechanical, are you aeronautical, electronics, software? And I play in pretty much everything. So I just kind of like saying engineered because that way it opens it up to, oh, you're one of those. And if that's the case, then I can just kind of float around and be ADHD Ben and the creative person I am. So that's kind of why I play with the whole engineered thing. My background is aeronautical engineering, but I haven't worked in that in 25, 30 years now. So that's basically the idea of the term. So yeah.
Aeronautical engineering, awesome. And I think that we got into this a little bit during your previous time on the channel, during Hangout and Nerd Out with Ginger, who brought you back along with Davis, amazing Hackster team member. But yeah, so Davis, what about you? How do you introduce yourself? Do you always say special effects engineer or something else?
It's a great question, and it's one that I kind of think about a lot because it changes from week to week. I originally kind of got into the film industry through camera department, so I was working on films in camera as an assistant camera, cinematographer, whatever people needed kind of to have on set, and mostly just because I liked making movies. I originally went to school for computer engineering, and I was like, that isn't any fun. I want to make movies. And so that was kind of like a nice mix of left brain, right brain, you're working with the technology and the cameras, but still using it for a creative outlet. But over time, obviously kind of folding in more and more special effects work and staying on the engineering side of the special effects, but it depends. Sometimes I'm working on a TV show in the camera department and not doing special effects, and sometimes I'm just working on builds here in the shop. So it depends on when you ask me what it is that I guess my answer would be.
Sweet. And you've both got a ton of cool stuff published online. For example, if we just take a quick look at Davis's Instagram, we've got robots, we've got interesting sci-fi high-tech guns. You've talked about doing remote-controlled, full-sized vehicles like cars. Is that what this is, or is that something else?
That was something else. I got to go see Le Mans, which is a famous car race for the first time, and was pretty excited.
Anyway, tons of cool stuff going on here. Would you like to tell us about one of your builds? What about this car?
That was... funny enough, one of the first special effects, true special effects build that I did, and it was on Motor Mythbusters. So for those that aren't familiar, obviously the original Mythbusters ran, I think, for almost 15 years or so. And then when that show came to an end, they kind of did a couple spin-offs after that, one of which being Motor Mythbusters. And I was very fortunate to be picked as one of the like builder presenters on that show, to, you know, be able to make things as part of the myths and then talk about the work that I was doing building those things. So the first major build that they kind of gave me was for a myth that we were testing, which was about trailer sway. And if you've ever worked with like, you know, a pickup truck and a trailer, you have a load obviously that goes on your trailer hitch. And if you load that trailer incorrectly, then you have the chance of fishtailing, where your trailer kind of sways back and forth at highway speed. And so we wanted to see, normally what you're supposed to do is slow down to get rid of that fishtail effect, but we wanted to see if you could accelerate out of that, essentially pull it straight by speeding up. And obviously our insurance, you know, company was like, we don't really want a person in there. That sounds really dangerous. So they tasked me with taking this like Dodge 1500, or yeah, there you go, this Dodge 1500 pickup truck and making it completely remote controlled with a nitrous system. So as far as I think I've found, I think it is the first remote control fully sized pickup truck with a nitrous system in it. And then obviously we got to have a lot of fun with that on the day and drive it around.
Lord.
But yeah, that was a very fun build. And technically my first on-screen robot.
So I'm going to interrupt a little bit here, though. I want people to understand, and this is something I have experience in, is driving a remote control car it's difficult, but not super hard. But as soon as you size it up to real size, the whole perspective of what you're driving becomes so much harder, like insane hard. So the fact that you can RC a full-sized vehicle and be able to get it going straight blows my mind, because I've tried it and it sucks.
It's really hard. Actually, and it's very funny that you mentioned that, because originally that myth was supposed to be, where I would do all the back-end engineering, I would build that pickup truck and everything. And then on the actual shooting day, Tori Belici, or one of the original Mythbusters, was actually going to drive it, for the myth, because he had done kind of the lead up to that. And as you touched on, it's very difficult. So, we set everything up, and I, got it ready for him, handed over the controller, and this is covered in the episode, but he was really struggling. It was, veering on and off, trying to get it down the middle of the runway. He was struggling with. And so he, was like, all right, Davis, you built this thing, you go drive it, and put it right down the middle of the runway on the first try. He's like, all right, you're going to do it for the myth, which my stress load immediately went through the roof. It was like, oh, now there's stakes behind it. But yes, to your point, it is incredibly difficult to do.
And there is a solution to it, though, and we came by it by accident, is that we were doing a vehicle going down a road, and the only way I could get a view around the bushes and everything that we were going through was to get me up onto a crane. And as soon as you're up on a crane and the car gets smaller, suddenly it's doable. So
interesting.
Usually the solution is just giving yourself that perspective. If you give yourself that perspective as if you're like 30 feet tall, it becomes easier. It's still harder, but it's easier. It's an easier harder.
You trick your brain. Yeah, you trick your brain into what you're used to. See, and what we wanted to do in that build was put like basically a POV camera inside where the driver's seat was. But unfortunately, we had to test a lot of things during that day. So that entire remote control system, this is a fun little behind the scenes fact, that entire remote control system was installed on the day. It was tested obviously prior, but on the day we had to do shots where it was driving and doing other stuff. And then they gave me an hour to basically reinstall that entire RC system. So I didn't end up getting that POV camera. And so instead, as you can see, I'm actually driving it from, I believe, the back seat of a van that's like kind of to the back corner of it. And that was the worst possible position to be in, because it's like trying to drive the car next to you on the highway using your fingers. Yeah, it was very bizarre.
Oh, no, and you were using sticks and not the dials. Anyway, we can dive into this whole thing because that is such an interesting challenge, because I hired professional RC drivers to do stuff like that. And even them, they're just like, no,
we don't want to do that. That's so cool. What was the project for that you were doing your build for?
Well, there's several, but the Predator, let's see, two Predators. So the Predator, there was a whole bunch of scenes that were never used, and we had remote control Humvee that we were using for some stuff.
That's so cool.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's about as much as I should probably go into that one, because I'm not sure exactly where I'm at on the NDA for that one.
It's not a friend DA, it's an NDA.
An actual. I did
Yeah.
ask these folks if there's anything that we need to specifically not talk about, and we're all just gonna manage ourselves.
We'll walk it up to the line, and then we'll stop
Yeah,
if we
yeah,
have
yeah.
to.
And it depends on the show and who you know in the production. Like, if you look at Ghostbusters and some of the stuff I did on there, I'm quite good friends with a lot of the producers and stuff, and I can just because we're friends and stuff, they trust me to not say the wrong things. But on that, so that allows me to go and say a few extra things that other people normally wouldn't be allowed to. So I don't know.
Well, you got to tell us, what are the extra things? What are the extra things we get to know?
How I squish. Well, like this is against pretty much every production known to man is that we destroyed one of the RTVs in one of the RC cars during filming, or I did. And instead of throwing it out, I kind of just took all the scavenged parts that we couldn't harvest to use for spare pieces and threw it into my car. And then a year later, I went to Jason and I said, hey, I kind of took the stuff even though I wasn't supposed to. And I'm wondering if it's okay if I rebuild it, but maybe we could use this. And this is how I framed it, is maybe we can use this as advertising to lead up to the movie. And they're like, oh, that's a great idea. And I'm like, yes. So
awesome.
that is like so outside of production. Like, if you're ever working on production, don't take anything. I know people do take stuff. Don't be that person, because you can end your career very quickly over some sort of widget that's really dumb. So so it was a pretty big risk on my part, but I got away with it. I don't know. I'm not sure.
Notice that it's always the A-list actors that are like, I took this costume home, and never the ones just on this starting, on their career.
Oh man.
Yeah, I was thinking about like Rami Malek with the Bohemian Rhapsody teeth, but most of us are not Rami Malek, alas.
Yeah. No, for sure.
Davis, I really appreciate you jumping in with questions here. I feel like I only have to work like half as hard. It's amazing. So, Ben, you've also written for Make Magazine. We've got an article here mentioning your Ghostbusters prop. What is one of the main things that, like, I'm sure both of you are hugely in the public eye, or you're well known for doing what you do, and you have this long-running YouTube channel with tons of subscribers. So I'm sure that you get the question a lot of times around different tips for people who are building stuff. And what would you say is one of the most frequent tips that you give out to people who are sort of new or want to get into making stuff? Because I see friends who get questions about, like, what did you study in college? But for a lot of us, we didn't actually study necessarily this exact type of stuff in college. So I don't know. I guess I kind of like led you to that particular question, but
it's a very good point. Like, like it or not, when you go onto a production, you're going to find that the people that went to film school, and I somewhat hate saying this, but I would say that less than 50% of the people working on set are people who went to film school. I'm not sure film schools are necessarily where you need to go, because you're going to find that you need little niche abilities and whatnot. Like an engineer needs to come in to help with the effects to make sure that it's safe, and you need somebody who's good at high voltage lines to help with wiring everything. So going to a college that only does that stuff, it kind of pockets you into a small niche, and it wouldn't necessarily be all that good. But as far as makers making things, the biggest thing, and I suffer from this, and most people I know suffer from this, and it's analysis paralysis. You've got an idea and you let it stew in your brain, and then you think, well, I'm going to need this microcontroller, and I need to get these LEDs, and then I need to get this servo, and I get blinded by the fact that I might not have that microcontroller, but I have a microcontroller. I have LEDs, but maybe not those LEDs, and I have a servo, and it might not be that servo. There is zero reason for me to start building, right? So the biggest thing I would say is the second you have an idea, if it comes down to a cardboard mock-up or 3D modeling, just start doing one thing, right? And as soon as you start getting into that one thing, then it leads to another, and you end up moving forward, versus the person who goes, well, I've been thinking about it, and this is the plan, and here's some artboards, and this is what I want to 3D print, but I don't have a 3D printer. And usually I'll go, well, there's 8 million 3D print services. And since you know me and I've got 3D printers, why did you not just ask me to 3D print something for you? Right? So don't don't get into analysis paralysis. And it can apply to even partway through the project where you're stymied and the project's stalled because you're waiting on something. Stop waiting. Just figure out another way to move forward. Just keep pushing it forward.
Absolutely. Davis, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, that's such a great, piece of advice too, because there's another YouTube out there called Sean Hodgkins, and he has one of my favorite lines, which is "Get the first failure out of the way."
Yeah.
And it goes into that idea of like, it doesn't matter in your head, that there are going to be hurdles, but until you get that first one out of the way, there's no progress that's going to be able to be made. And that's, kind of applicable to more things than beyond, just making. But in that specific context, it's good. But one of the other questions that obviously, and Ben, you probably get this all the time, is, people are like, oh, that's so cool. Like, I love engineering. I want to build props and I want to build, stuff like this. And the side of that I always try to talk about is that any engineer could do, a lot of what I do. Obviously, Ben, you have a far more specialized and more experience, so it, kind of puts you in another tier. But at the, kind of entry level, any engineer could do a lot of the builds that I do. And what I say is that, like, engineering is half of that. It's half of the ingredients. And what people often forget is that, I have years of storytelling experience, years of visual storytelling experience. And that's the other key ingredient that I always tell people to try and find ways to integrate into your curriculum. Because if it was only engineering that they cared about, Disney Imagineers would just be top of their class engineers. And they're not. They're hiring people who have that visual storytelling aspect to it. And that's so important. I mean, I come from theater and film and all that stuff. And that combined with the engineering is what gets you kind of those, the builds and the chops to be able to go and do projects like this.
Well, and this is one thing that's interesting because so Autumn's working on something back here. You got that microcontroller we burned out?
Ooh.
So we got one microcontroller that we hooked up to an LED pack and we plugged it in. And unfortunately, the wires aren't here. But then the magic smoke started coming out, and we're like, "What the hell?" Because there's another one back there that's wired exactly the same as far as we can tell. And we've even gone through and looked at all the solder joints. We don't know what went wrong. But we have one that works and one that doesn't. Now, the one thing I noticed that both of us were doing is that we're hunting down the problem. And knowing what the problem is very important. But it's also, give yourself a timeline going, we can hunt for this problem, but after 15, 20 minutes, if we can't find the problem, we need to move on and just know that there might be a gremlin that pops up, but like the best guess that we have was a bad solder joint. That's the best guess. We don't know. So it's one of those where, and don't be afraid to let the smoke out. If you're buying microcontrollers, they cost a couple of bucks. If you need 2, buy 5. And I nearly guarantee that you're going to let the smoke out of one of them.
Yeah. The number of times I've had to overnight something because I was like, oh, this is enough. I don't need more than that. You've probably had the same experience.
Oh, I got it. Yeah.
Danger, danger. We have a question from the chat. Thank you for dropping that in. Everybody, feel free to add more. For Davis, do you consider yourself a car enthusiast? Do you have a fun car yourself? It is rare, but I love to see crossover between the car community and the maker community. Great question.
I was definitely a petrol head, I would say, growing up. My grandmother had like a 1955 MGT, so I grew up like riding in the back of what we call like a Corella DeVille car for people that don't know cars. But it was like having that kind of experience as a kid and riding in car. And my dad, was a big car guy as well, and so those kind of influences growing up and riding in fun cars and my first ever car. I love my first ever car. It was a 2000, I believe it was a 2001 Subaru Impreza, and just like as a Colorado kid, I grew up in Colorado. As a Colorado kid, like ripping around in Colorado in your first ever car that is everything that you want it to be, like that sticks with you. And I think that was kind of what pushed me more in that direction and kind of helped me in the world of like the Motor Mythbusters and being able to kind of hack it on that show. Unfortunately, now I live in the city, so I'm not really able to have a fun car the way I used to. But it's certainly like that is an ingredient that doesn't go away from you. Like you can take the fun car away from the kid, but you can't take that, like element of thrill seeking and enjoyment for a fun car out of, the person. So I would say, yes, certainly I've been a car kid my whole life. And I hope to do more projects like that because I had so much fun.
And working on cars is so important too. Like I think a lot of kids just pulling wrenches and, getting on that one lug nut or some bolt on an exhaust and it lets go and you bash your knuckles and you're screaming all sorts of curse words. But that will make you a better engineer. And this is why, is that you will, when you're designing, you're going, is this bolt going to seize up? Yes or no? That will go through your head. And then you go, if somebody is holding on to a wrench here, are they going to smash their knuckles? And if you say yes, you design around it so that they don't. And it's like knowing where rivets go, or being able to, can I reach a hand underneath a wing spar so that I can buck a rivet or something like that. These are things that you would never know doing digital engineering and stuff and 3D modeling. You can model stuff, but as soon as you model it and you look at it and you're like, oh, you can't build that. It's impossible to build. So having spent some time pulling wrenches and just getting in there and even changing tires or brake pads, that will teach you an immense amount about what works and what doesn't, and it will improve your designs. Huge. Absolutely.
And I think a lot of people, that's kind of, a car is one of the first things that you turn a wrench on. You know, it's you have that sense of ownership of, this is, you know, my car. This is something that I, you know, can fix when it breaks and can make better and sometimes make worse on accident. But yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, the getting dirty aspect of it and getting some grease under your fingernails is one of the parts that I loved about it.
I disagree. I wouldn't necessarily, like, using cars as analogies is great, but it's changed a little bit from when, like, you and I were kids to now. Is that I think I see a lot of people more like, I built my first 3D printer. That counts.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So you don't have to buy a $5,000 car or a $200 car from somebody and then fix it up so that you can get it roadworthy. You can get a 3D printer and do the same thing, or a little robot, or like a kit or something like that. But cars, for bigger stuff, if you want to get into bigger stuff, you need to work on bigger stuff, because engineering doesn't scale. Just like driving an RC car doesn't scale, engineering doesn't scale, including flight dynamics and stuff over wings, the whole bit. Nothing scales properly.
Yeah.
That makes a huge amount of sense. That backtracking for a second, Ben, the point that you make about knowing how people interact with cars and how that's going to affect how much you can hack them and how you can hack them reminds me of something DJ Harrigan, aka Mr. Volt on YouTube, was talking about with his Wheatley build, where like he designed it all in CAD and it would all fit together great, but you couldn't get a screwdriver in to like turn it. So assembling and disassembling the first few were just a total nightmare. And that absolutely resonates.
And you got to go through that. The thing is that if you don't have something to build with and you have to start fabricating parts, you have to go through that pain. I still go through that pain, maybe a little less so. Like, I've learned enough lessons that I wouldn't say that my builds work off the first go. In fact, they never ever do. But they're a lot more refined now with experience than they were in the past because of the lessons I've learned. But the thing is that you have to print it out and you have to build it to find out where those things are. So don't, just go out there. Again, this goes back to just take your design that you can do. So they did the first thing that was important is move forward, do the design, and then print it out and then go, oh my God, this has got to change. That's awesome. You learned a ton of stuff. Now build the new one.
Yeah. And I think of the engineer stuff made here, and he has another great line, which is don't accidentally design microscopic parts, because that's very easy to do in CAD. The scroll wheel just keeps going.
That happened to me recently, where I've been learning to use Nomad Sculpt because I wanted to be able to create organic forms, which is really tough for me. Ben, I see you use Onshape, or at least they interviewed you, which is great for me for like making sort of like parametric pieces. But I tried to design a Raspberry Pi enclosure shaped like a kiwi bird, and it looked awesome from like my second thing ever. I was like, this is amazing. It looks so cool. It's gonna be rad. And then I like exported it, and it was either this big or this big and outside the build volume of my printer based on how I exported it, because that program is not parametric. And I was like, okay, we need to go back to this. It's just so, and I'd put like 15 hours or something of just like, oh yeah, this is going to be great.
But here's one thing, is that you have a lot of those, like, if you're really good at using Nomad Sculpt, that's great. But one of the first things I do is I put a cube. Like, well, I don't always first do that. Put a cube in there. It's like 1 centimeter, 1 centimeter, 1 meter, or whatever. Then when you import it into something, you've got a reference dimension that you can actually measure. Then you scale according to the cube.
That's brilliant.
Yes, the cube. I might have found that. I found a comment about that. It might have been you on the internet after like looking this up. later on, I started just using scans from my cell phone because I'm working on like stuff that
Yeah.
goes over a mask, and so I just literally
Yeah,
scan my face in, and that seems to preserve the dimensions. But like the cube trick, so good.
Yeah. And if you're scanning your face, though, you can scan your face with like a phone. That works out really well. Sometimes it doesn't work perfectly. I've had a few people had failures. And one of the things that I do is I tell them to put one dot on their nose here and another dot 1 inch up, right? And it's really visible. Make it like a white dot or whatnot. But then you've got a reference dimension in your model. And now you can scale according to that.
That's amazing. Yeah, I could even make like I've got these little like rubber stick-on feet that I use for stuff, and
Totally.
like so it would be like in the physical model dimensions as well. That's so smart. Yeah, because yeah, actually I haven't exported anything from that. It could still be way off. Who knows? It seems like it's right, but anyway. Davis, what do you use for modeling and stuff?
I do all of my basically everything I do is in Fusion 360. In hindsight, it's very funny how this has worked out because my high school like technology class has ended up being the closest in trajectory to what I do now. Like we had, and I'm very fortunate that our school district like was willing to, go to the links to make sure that we had Autodesk, CAD modeling software in high school. We had 3D printers, and this was in like 2012, so they were the size of the refrigerator, but still like we were able to, as high school students, start 3D printing things out. And then laser cutter, we had a laser cutter that I started messing around with. We had like an editing class. It's very interesting how all of those things kind of ended up tracking where I am now. But yeah, CAD software is one of the things that, again, like people who get into, and it's changed a lot, now 3D printers used to be an extension of your CAD model. Now 3D printers have kind of existed in their own, environment for a while now because people will buy them, and there's nothing wrong with this, but people will buy them and only print out the models that exist in like MakerWorld or Thingiverse. And the 3D printing companies recognize that that's amazing. Like now your consumer does not have to touch a CAD modeling software to be able to use your product. So it's great for them, but I would say for the people that are really wanting to make their own things, like, it sounds obvious, but yeah, just like start tinkering around in Fusion 360. I think they have a free personal license. Onshape, obviously, I believe, has a free personal license as well. But yeah, like those things, that is what is going to make the big difference between somebody who is restricted to only finding their, thing in GrabCAD or Thingiverse or MakerWorld versus being able to, create whatever you want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And here's one thing I see happen a fair amount, maybe less so now, but there used to be like, I use Autodesk Fusion and I use Onshape or SolidWorks, and somebody uses CATIA, and they will tout how great their software is. And the reality is that all these software packages have matured to the point where it's at the point where it's like if you grab a Snap-on wrench versus a Mac wrench versus a Craftsman wrench, do you know what the common thing is that they're all wrenches and they will all undo the bolts. Some might be better quality, some might, but use what you have available to you. And don't throw shade on the person that's using any other different software. And with some of the new file formats that are out there, I wouldn't even say new, but like with the file format systems that they have out there, all of these software packages can talk to each other. And knowing that is that somebody can work on Fusion 360, give me a step file, and I can work on it in Onshape and give CATIA a Parasolid or whatever. But like, just grab whatever you're used to. And that can also come down to somebody being used to the Autodesk layout and verbiage versus I'm used to the Onshape and SolidWorks verbiage. I can work in any of these systems, but I'm faster in one. And that's the only difference.
Yeah. And I would say that's the same thing. Oh, I was just gonna say that's the same thing too. Like people also ask me like, oh, what editing software do you recommend? And it's like, those tools are just it's like a slip and slide. Whatever slip and slide is fastest to get the thing that's in your head to the real world, that's all that matters. Like that is all I care about.
Dude, that is amazing. That's such a good analogy. I'm so using that.
Thank you.
That's so good. Yeah, and there's different software that's good for different applications, of course, too. Like I was saying with Nomad versus Onshape, and then I use Tinkercad if I just want to stick two models together and make like some holes in it, Or you could use Blender for that as well, just like mashing stuff together. And they're all already fine.
Yeah, I think there's kind of this pervasive idea that there's like engineering Anubis that measures the software you use against like what should be used. It's like, no, just whatever you make is what you make.
I was working. I'm trying to think of what show. I'm not gonna, because this potentially be throwing shade on a show or somebody. But I had somebody come in and they were using Tinkercad, and everybody in the art department's like, "Oh my God, you're using that? Like, what kind of fool are you?" And I'm like, they gave me a model I needed, and I moved forward. Why is this an issue? I'm like, you're kind of being a jerk here.
And if they can do it with Tinkercad, to me, that's more impressive because like the constraints on the view and stuff can be really irritating, and like it's its whole own thing. We got a couple more cool questions here. Honestly, most of our people tend to watch after the fact. By the way, if you're watching this later, don't feel left out. You can still drop stuff in the comments. But from one of our live viewers, we got Shane. For both designers, what's your first 48 hours look like regarding when you're first approached for a project to determine if you can build or assemble a team and develop or estimate the cost of the build? I have a feeling this is going to be highly dependent on the project, but please go ahead.
So I'm known as the person that's too dumb to say no. So when everybody else says no, they'll generally come to me and I'll be like, well, I can try, you know? And it's gotten me into, like, I've managed, knock on wood, to kind of get a lot of things across the finish line, but like that's with blood, sweat, tears, and like, I can't believe this is even possible. I wouldn't necessarily ever look at a project and say no to it. And this is such a double-edged sword. Like, I always try to say yes, but there are certain things where, you know, people's safety and whatnot comes into account, then there are things that you say no to. But first 48 hours is take a look at it, figure out about how much time that it's going to take you, and I kid you not, triple it. And you probably will still go past that, because your brain self-sabotages hours and everything. And then, just start moving forward. Don't say no. Just do it.
Davis, what'd you think?
I would say, I mean, that's certainly, I also kind of suffer on the same side. Again, especially, heartwarming to hear that somebody who's been doing this forever is also in the same position of like, well, I guess I better say yes. But especially too, you know, when that kind of is your livelihood, like sometimes you have to say yes and figure it out in order to, you know, pay the bills. But similar to what you said, it's just kind of figuring out, you know, what are the main problems, and sometimes the main problems are creative, and that puts you in a weird position where you're like, a great example is like the robot Newt sitting right there. Talking with the director in that project it was really fun. We had total creative freedom. But I have to, of course, be the bad cop where it's like, all right, you know, we want a robot that's one-wheeled and, you know, rolls around. It's like, we can do that. But like, if you're going to give me 5 weeks, like these are the conversations we need to have, which is how do we make this logistically work? And trying to balance that. I think that's always kind of the hardest thing. And maybe Ben, you can touch on this too, where it's like, you have a very strong creative vision, and you have to be that bad cop and be like, well, this is like the nature of what we're going to have to do because of that. So I think it's trying to make sure that you're not, because I think sometimes a lot of engineers get too focused in like, well, we have to do it this way, and this is like, you know, the only way that it's going to work. And it's like, no, it's good to be pushed. You know, it's good to get out of your comfort zone. And that first 48 hours, kind of like you said, is good for that, where it's like, all right, this is how I would do it. Now let's rethink this problem, and how would I actually do that to deliver that creative design? And I think that's what's really fun is getting pushed out of that comfort zone.
So this is one piece of advice that like I probably should have led up to it. It should have been in the foreground of my head before. But so there's a way that you can say yes but mean no, and still have people smile at the end. And this is something that a business coach taught me. There's 2 ways to approach a problem. You can say yes but, or yes and I'll explain why you need to say either of those and the outcome of them. But the thing is the first word that any director or producer hears out of your face is yes. And they absolutely love that, and that immediately gives them the endorphins they need to then land the punch saying, yes, but if you want it to be on a monowheel, it's going to take an extra 4 weeks to do. So can you push shooting out 4 weeks? Because we can do it, but there's where that but is. It's going to do that. Or we can do 2 wheels, and that will solve the problem. And that generally will solve. You're still saying yes, but you're giving them the downside, and you're landing it nice. The yes and is that they say, hey, we need a 2-wheeled robot, and we need it to do this. And you look at this and you go, and they're giving me 4 weeks to do this, and I could do this in 4 hours. So you do, yes, and what I can do is I can also add a couple of arms that are articulated to it. If you would like me to do that, it'll be a couple extra bucks. And because suddenly you are giving them a yes and you're adding value to their idea, they absolutely adore you. And you're going to find with any producer or anybody you're working with, there's going to be instances where you use one or the other. But those are two key things that have changed my career from being, yeah, I can go in and do stuff, and being that negative guy. They're going, can we do this? And you're like, oh God, no, that can't happen. You go, yes, but it's going to take this amount of time, or we're going to need some more resources and it's going to cost you more money. So again, that yes is so critical. Always say yes, but you can say yes and mean no. I guess is the best way to go about it.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah, and you're right. And I would say the other thing too in there is that it's again kind of what I talked about. Like some people they say no out of the gate because their brain immediately like traces a path of how they think that project's going to go, and in reality, like obviously things go left. But yeah, it's so interesting to see kind of that first 48 hours. And I would say for makers too, like obviously the conversation we had is kind of more like, working with producers and directors and production teams like that. But for a maker who's just working on these projects by themselves, and what would a first 48 hours look like for them? And obviously even with my own personal projects, but I would say the number one thing is recognize what you can do and recognize what you can't do. Because it's okay to work with other people. You know what I mean? Like it's fine to bring in other resources. And I think saying no to a project for yourself just because you can't do something right then and there is a detriment to you, because how else are you going to learn?
Well, and they're asking you to achieve a goal. They're not asking you to specifically do it as you.
Yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can help them get to that goal, your value is just as much as if you built it. If you go, hey, wait a minute, I can't do this, but I'm going to bring in a buddy of mine to handle all this because he knows how to do that, you're still golden, right?
Yeah.
It's a matter of, can you achieve the goal? Sure. But it's not going to be me building it. That's all.
Yeah.
This is so relevant to you folks, particularly as guests, because like you're saying, there's this huge difference between building something, to a spec of that someone else has, a prop with their vision and where their like goals are the key, versus like something that you're building more for yourself. And you've both got stuff up about this. So Ben has this animatronic thing and a ton of other props that you've worked on, obviously. But then also, Davis, you gave a talk recently at Chaos Communication Congress about prototypes to props, which people can find on YouTube. And I'm definitely going to be digging into that. What's so, the last question was about, the first 48 hours of a project. And of course, that sort of comprises both. And you answered a lot around like the props process, like when someone comes to you with a project and you have to decide how you're going to do it, whether you're going to do it, and what to propose. What about with your personal projects?
Oh, man. It's your harshest critic is yourself. Your personal projects can be like an exercise in self-deprecation. I don't know how else. It's funny because I've built like some of the antennas and stuff that I have behind me here. I built a few of them and I thought that they were absolute crap, and I handed them out to people. These are radio antennas that I've developed, and the people I handed them out to were like, this is amazing and they're perfect. And I'm like, they're broken and they've got flaws. And instead of, this is one thing, take something that you've built that you think is completely flawed and ugly and hand it to somebody that you would see as an expert or even not an expert. And without saying what the flaws are or anything, don't point anything out to them. Ask them what they think about it. And try to avoid getting friends, because friends are always going to try to inflate your ego. But you're going to find that these people will struggle to see the flaws that you see, like to the point where you're just like, are you kidding me? Like, that is so obvious and in your face. You can get away with stuff. So like, allow yourself to be flawed. And I learned that working with Adam on a couple of things where he was drilling some holes into his proton pack for some lighting. And like he just took a piece of paper down with the hole pattern, and he punched little holes about where they needed to be and started drilling. I'm like, oh my God, what are you doing? Why aren't you throwing it on the lathe or on the drill press? And he's like, because it'll take too long. He's like, just drill it. And I'm like, what if a hole's out? And he's like, then I enlarge it and use a larger drill bit. And I'm just like, I hate it when people use logic like that, because don't get into that. And Adam's great at just like, why are we still talking? Just start building it, right?
Gets back into the stuff about not necessarily having to wait for having the perfect tools for the job or the perfect components on hand. Just kind of like,
Everything's a hammer.
yeah, let's do it live.
Yeah. And I would say, I mean, personal projects are always, that's kind of where I get to have the most fun. And I would say that the one thing I am grateful for, you know, like film has taught, and maybe you can touch on this too, Ben, like film has taught me that you have to finish a project. You know, like the cameras will be rolling at some point, and if you're not ready, like that's a failure on your part. And obviously on one side, like they won't hire you back, but also on your personal side, when it comes to personal projects, like it has given me the discipline to, when I start a personal project, I always finish it. And obviously, you know, like there's prototype phases, but if you really are going to sink your teeth into a project, that's just gone such a long way for me, is, you know, knowing that when it gets difficult, that you are able to kind of, you know, go to the, you know, get past the finishing line. And I would say, you know, it's for me, I try to take that kind of nugget of what film prop making has made so much fun, which is, let's do something whimsical, let's do something nobody else has done before, and the enjoyment of figuring out that process for the first time is what I try to kind of do in my personal builds of like, and again, I use the condiment cannon as an example a lot because it's so ridiculous and it's so silly that like if anybody proposed that, a prop is like kind of one of the first things you would think about, and that's, you know, just because like it's something that would have no practical purpose, and that's why it was so great, because I learned all of these things that I would. It made me a better engineer. You know, I come out the other side, and you know, I'm not shooting condiments every day. Like that build project was its own reward, kind of in a sense.
And the other thing about film too, though, is with your personal projects, there's a point where you learn in film that like you're working to the last minute to get it perfect. But once that camera is rolling, that's where the project stops, because continuity and the way it moves and everything has to be exactly the same. So at that point, you can't change it. So that also gives you a point where you might have a developed hard stop in your head, but that isn't necessarily where you need to stop. The project stops when you're using it for its purpose. And once you're there, you realize that, well, maybe I don't need all these other whiz-bang things. I can still use it as is, and you can finish the project. I don't want to say incomplete, but it's complete for its use, if that makes any sense.
No, and that's helped me a lot, because again, it's so easy to keep adding and iterating, you know, and make that project this big nebulous thing. But no, having those hard stops, you know, it's helped me in that way. How do you kind of balance for your personal projects? I mean, obviously you're busy a lot with work, but for your personal projects, where do you kind of draw the line between enjoyment and just like making something for the sake of making it, or
it's an exceptionally hard question for me, because what I do for a hobby and what I do for work are exactly the same thing.
It's not a Venn diagram, it's just a circle.
No. Yeah, so it's I really don't have an answer for that, because it like it's so nebulous. I don't separate the two, and I've never really been able to do that. Yeah.
I mean, my other question to that would be, you know, and this is kind of what I struggle with a little bit. I live in my workshop, like my bedroom's above my kitchen. And as I always say, like the downside of that is when you live where you work, you're working all the time.
Oh my God. Yes.
And as a result, like you're never free to not do it. Do you feel like you are kind of on that side? I mean, obviously it's nice when you have like a production, you have a team, you know, you can hand things off, but do you still feel like you struggle from that?
I struggle handing anything off. I always, and it's not an ego thing, but it's like I've got my way of doing it, and I think it's the best way. And here's one thing too: is hand off something to somebody else, and even if they're doing what you think is the wrong way, let them do it, because you're 9 times out of 10 going to learn that the way you've been doing it is the hard way the whole time, and they're gonna school you. Right?
They'll humble you on that one. Yeah.
Right? Another thing is some friends of mine saw me waffling on my antenna business and stuff. And part of that is that my business was out of my house. And because my business was out of my house, again, this feeds into I can always work. I can always do something, but then that comes at the loss of your family or other things that you're doing. So they offered me this space, and it was like, well, I'm not sure if I can afford that. And they said, oh, you don't have a choice. We're moving you in. And literally put in the trucks and started moving here. But now I'm able to separate, like there's certain things that I can't physically do because they're not at home. And I know that not everybody has the luxury of being able to afford a space, but it's made a big difference in sort of my work-life balance. I'm no longer obsessing about what's in the shop, and that I can stay there until 3 a.m. and finish it off. Is I can actually go and hang out with my kids, and they're like, "Oh, this is what it's like to have a dad."
Film is all consuming. I mean, as you know, it will suck every minute of time out of you if you let it.
Well, this would be a question for you: is that like, how do you manage the hours? Because I found, like, for my life and stuff, I haven't done a whole lot of film lately. I'm doing a lot of individual prop kind of jobs, but like when you're doing 12-hour days, 5 days a week and that's just the start. That's the beginning of the project. When you come to the end, say 6 to 8 weeks, you're doing 16-hour days, at least 6 days a week, sometimes 7 days a week. There is no social life. So like, what do you do to cope with that?
That's always kind of an interesting ingredient, is that I think a lot of people aren't familiar with like the film hours. Like when people talk about film, that's like kind of one of the first things that come up if you actually work in the business, is like the hours are brutal. And I would say I'm very fortunate. Like I try to kind of bounce between, because like I'm local 600, so I do like camera work. Like next week I'm going to be on a TV show, and so that is like a nice way to break it up. Work with different people, solve different problems. Kind of use a different part of my brain. It helps to get out of the workshop and step away from a problem and kind of let that percolate just way in the back of your mind. And also just like the social aspect of it. I, largely work on most projects by myself. That's kind of like the budget tier that I usually operate in, is they're not willing to hire a team. So for me, it's nice to be able to like go do something social, be on set, be around other people. And it's long hours, but like I enjoy being with those people. And also too, I'm very fortunate, like living in, kind of like the heart of Los Angeles, like I can go hang out, with people whenever I need, because I do live by myself. So it's, just kind of like, all right, time to get out of the workshop, time to go do something, time to go, whether it's on set or like hang out in that sense. But I would say that's, a big part of what I've tried to get better at. Is I used to have like a workshop in an apartment, like a tiny apartment. And while the separation of church and state, as I like to say, was nice, is like, I've been able to be more productive and kind of keep those threads going on projects. So it's a trade-off, and I would say there's no right answer, but at the end of the day, like making sure that you still do something outside of like the direct thing that you want to do all the time is crucial.
And here's one thing I think you should bring up, is that effects and stuff and props is awesome. But a lot of people don't realize that grips and camera, taking a look at the cranes and the dollies and the tracks and how everything integrates and how everything snaps together and how you can motivate something with a motor versus having somebody push it. That can be like, I'm always gobsmacked that like they bring in a new crane or something like that, and I'm just sitting there looking at all the bearings,
the new toy.
How does that movement work so smoothly? It's a great entry for people that think that like, well, I'm not in engineering or something like that, then try camera or try being a grip. Do something like that.
I mean, grips are the engineers of set, and it's they have to figure out, how am I going to rig this camera to the side of this car that doesn't have any mounting points on it, and I used to work grip and electric, like when I first moved out here. And it kind of goes back to what we're talking about, where it's like having beyond just that engineering, like, element, it's all a team sport. Like all of those ingredients have to come together on the day to be able to make a movie. You can't do that, in a vacuum.
And there are two kinds of engineer. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, I want to hear what you were just going to say.
Well, I find like before I got into movies, I worked as a freelance engineer, and I found that there's two main types of engineers, and there's the bean counter engineers and there's the creative engineers, right? Now, both have a place. The bean counters are good at, you take a structure and you show them that, and they're going to make sure that it's safe. They're going to run all the numbers. They're going to do all the analysis, and you're going to make sure that you have something that will work at the end of the day. But then you have the creative engineers, are the ones who, worked on a farm or pulled wrenches and go, I wonder if I could put an arm out like this and do this. And if you ask a bean counter engineer to design something up, they will kind of go like, well, do I start with the formula? And you're like, you're not the right person for the job. And it's not that they're not qualified to do that stuff, but they're definitely two mindsets. And you're going to find that it's one thing that Davis has kind of touched on, is there's the creative side where I know that like from sailing or from paragliding, what ropes and strings will actually hold certain weights, where somebody who's sat behind a desk figuring out I-beams would never be able to tell you that no, we don't need a 1/4-inch cable. We just need like an 1/8-inch thread of tech, and that will be able to handle all the weight that we have. But because they don't have that practical knowledge, you wouldn't know that.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
talk. You mentioned the Chaos Communication Congress, and one of the things I talked about at that Congress was the side of creative engineering. You know, like we tend to think of like the arts and the engineering as kind of being like these two separate entities. But like you talked about, Ben, if you can increase the number of angles with which you can approach problems, that's huge. And the only way you do that is by doing these things that like intersect and wouldn't
Totally.
normally play together. And yeah, I think that's just such a big part of it.
Absolutely. This comes back to what you were talking about before with, knowing how cars work and therefore like knowing where you need to allow space for someone to interact with something. I wanted to bring it back real quick to this concept that I don't think anyone used this term yet, but third space is essentially, the concept of like, in that case, it's kind of like a second/third space because the first space is your home, the second space is your office, the third space is like a leisurely place where you can go and hang out with people. And with a lot of us, I think it kind of blends. So there's things like maker spaces, even libraries are kind of becoming this, but then there's like accelerators and art residency programs and co-working spaces where people can overlap and not just like you can get your work done, you can also like get access to expertise. Loads of what I learned from about electronics early on was just from being in hacker spaces and like sharing what I knew and like watching other people's talks. And then there's access to machinery and tools and materials you might not otherwise have, and then you start looking those up, and then like and also like that separation that you're talking about where sometimes it's I like how you each have your own way. I'm more of the Davis side where I like to be able to just like think of something and like work on it without having to like put on clothes and think about food and like how am I going to organize my day?
Reducing friction. Don't get me wrong. Reducing friction is not a problem. It can become a problem. I would say this would be from the I'm a dad and I've got a family.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
Point of mind, and the people that don't necessarily have those sorts of constraints.
Yes.
With makerspaces, this is one thing I try to tell people's makerspaces, and you're right, getting those tools like laser cutters and 3D printers is huge for a lot of people because they wouldn't necessarily be able to afford it. But the real value of those places is the mind trust. I was working on the Netflix Predator for the one with the indigenous peoples. There was some real problems I was having. I couldn't figure out this one thing for it was the bear trap actually. Like how to close it properly, make it happen fast. And I was frustrated, so I got in my vehicle and I went to a local makerspace that I know, which is Fuse 33. And I sat down in the front office and I was, frustrated. And I just wanted to hang out with like-minded people. And I'm like, what would you do? It was 5 minutes later, I had a solution to the problem. The brain trust there was like instantaneous. If you got a problem, you don't even necessarily have to be in that maker group, like showing up and just saying, hey, I want to take a look around and then ask a question. You will find the answer nearly instantaneously. It's crazy.
Yeah, and that's a really good point too, because I think a lot of people see makerspaces as being like, I don't need a laser cutter, so like I guess I won't, get a makerspace, go hang out with them. But you're absolutely right. Like it's so much more than just a place to get tools. It's a place to get information and help with the problems. And I'm definitely a big advocate on that side too. Like there's a great space. There's Crash Space in Los Angeles and social media. Yeah, Crash Space is great, and they're like heavy on the social, kind of light on the machinery, because you can always find another place that has a machine. But if you build like a great community, that's just such a good part. And I strongly recommend people just go check it out. You don't have to become a member, but just go check it out.
Yeah. Ton of these places have like open nights where people.
And usually you don't have to pay unless you're using the machinery. Like you can usually just go hang out.
And you're right too. Is the personality of each space? There's certain spaces that I get along with, and some spaces I don't. That's fine. Go hang out with the one you get along with. Yeah. The only way you can find out is to go show up.
Yeah.
There used to be a bunch of different ones in the Ann Arbor, Detroit area, and there was one that was specifically more around. I'm trying to remember what they were. Like don't remember. Anyway, they were more focused around bikes. There were a ton of people who did like weird welded bikes, and there's like other ones where it does more automotive, and ones where people are more like a lot of them are integrating lots of sewing machines and like fab textile arts, and then there's other ones that it's sort of like any other type of community where you're gonna find there's tons of biohacking ones. Anyway, yeah, that kind of concept.
Totally.
We are coming up on the hour. I want to make sure we get to Cyril's question because I think it dovetails nicely with what we've been talking about around starting projects. And then if there's anything that y'all would like to make sure that we get in there, absolutely that, and then we'll maybe wrap up a bit. But, so Cyril asks, whether it's a personal project or a work endeavor, how do you decide when to abandon a project? And this also comes into something that one of you said earlier around, like, the difficulty of figuring out when a personal project is finished as well. So either one of those, or both.
You go.
That's great. Yeah. Also, hi, Cyril. I love Cyril. He's great. I got to meet him at Hackaday. But
nice.
I would say, like, abandon is always such a strong word, I think, because that implies that there's no, that you're not able to, like, it's like a ship. You're like, well, it's at the bottom of the sea now. Like, whereas, I've learned so much from the projects that I've, kind of started. And then usually I would say pivot is the right word. I would say abandon is very different than pivot, because you're going to learn so much in that process of failure. And if something works on the first try, like, cool, it's fun, you're not going to learn a whole lot. So I would say, like, of the projects that have not worked the way I thought they would, I've tried to pivot it into something else, and it's whether that's a prototype or, whatever, that's kind of the, seen as an ingredient as opposed to an end point. Like, you get a project up to a point where, and kind of like I talked about, like, finishing a project is crucial, because if you abandon something, that's when it gets hardest, and that's when you're going to learn the most. And I will say, like, there's obviously a time and resource ingredient to this. Like, you and I are very lucky that we get to build things, for a living. So that is more of, like, our world. But if you are looking at it from, like, I want to come home, I want to relax, I want to just, like, tinker with things, yes, make sure that you have your peace and you're not, making yourself more frustrated in the thing that you're doing outside of, your work. But the takeaway there being, really look at what it is that you're doing, why it isn't working. There's only a finite number of reasons something won't work, and see if you can't use that as a jumping off point to pivot to something. There's nothing wrong with, like, ending up in a different place than where you thought you would go.
Yeah. A lesson that I got from Adam, and on one of his tested things, and again, I just adore the guy because there's so much wisdom packed into that brain of his. Effectively, what it comes down to is that once you start a project, is, let's say that you got painting something to a certain point and you're not liking the color and you're thinking, I'm just going to let it dry and then I'm going to prime it and start again. No. Finish painting it to the very end. And the part of the reason why is that you might discover something that works that you would have never thought of before. There's been a few projects where I'm, like, halfway through and I'm thinking, I need to abandon this. I need to start out a whole new motion mechanism for this. But and Thing would be a good example. Is the walking mechanism. I was using two cams to rotate some linkages and doing, like, a 5-bar mechanism. It was quite difficult, and I was thinking this is never going to work, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. But I still finished that one mechanism and still rotated it, and I still played with it in my hand until there was one thing that snapped, and I realized it was a timing issue. It had nothing to do with the design. Had I abandoned it at that point and started with a new mechanism, I would have lost, like, 2 weeks worth of work. And instead, I was able to move forward because I allowed myself to kind of live and sit in it and take the project to as far as you possibly can, because there's lessons in that build that you don't have to relearn on the next build. You're not going to start something and go to 30%. And then go, okay, I'm going to start again. Then you go to 40% and then start again. And you go back and start and go to 50%. So in that 40 and 50% steps, you could have learned those lessons on that 30% one and saved yourself having to rebuild something so many times.
Yeah. And I think you made a very interesting, well, and I was going to say, I think you made a really interesting point, which is that sometimes people will walk it up and then they see a failure, like, in the distance, and they'll stop. And that's, like, that you don't do that. The failure is where you're going to learn something, and like you talked about, like, don't avoid that. Don't, like, my tech teacher always used to say, fail fast, fail hard, fail often. And so if you're not letting yourself do that, like, you're going to lose out on a lot.
A future failure, or the perspective of a future failure, isn't a current failure. I think that's a very good point.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to throw in that there's a couple other options as well. There's a lot of projects that rather than abandoning or pivoting them, I'll cannibalize them later. Like, oh, I can take this from that, and with the motivation fairy being so hard to control, sometimes I do get really stoked about something and suddenly all the things come together and it's like, oh man, this is the one thing from 10 years ago. I've got a claw from a first robot from like high school, and I've got this like horrible little sumo bot thing. Anyway, and then like another option also is just like when you put it down for a while, through learning through failure and through learning for other projects, we also like sometimes it'll teach me how to do the thing that I needed for this project years ago. And suddenly, because I'm a pack rat, I can pick it up again and be like, hey, now I know how to do this. I have this skills and I can just like plow through that obstacle and now I can pull it together. That, of course, depends on like your amount of storage space and your tolerance for clutter. But for me, those are both like I am able to live like one of those sci-fi creatures where you got the guy in the cave who does the one thing and whatever. So that's me in the future. So for me, that works.
No, and it can be inspiration, like you said, having so many different things. Your answer might be sitting right in front of your desk from 5 projects ago. I don't know how many times that's happened to me. So yeah.
Absolutely. Cool. Well, it seems like we're at a good stopping point, and you've both dropped so many gems, and I wish I could have like shown everything, but we'll just have to like keep in touch and stuff. Good. But again, Ben has been on the show before in form of Hang Out and Nerd Out with Ginger, our amazing coordinator, who does so much cool stuff at Hackster. You've both got so much for people to dig into on Instagram, on YouTube, various talks and different articles that you've been featured in, as well as like official channels around like Adam Savage and Mythbusters and all that good stuff. So there's so much more to explore. You've both shared a bunch of fun quotations from other people that you've kind of taken to heart. Are there any that you've come up with yourselves that like you're like, oh yeah, like for me it's like I've got a post-it note on my desk that says let it suck, and it's basically my distillation of like perfect is the enemy of good, but it's just like let it suck. Anything like that?
So when I was in college, I came up with one thing, and I think this is more a utopian thought, but I think that if we can, as humanity, strive towards it, is I always say, imagine if knowledge was shared and not sold. Right? So like the concept is instead of having to pay for an engineering degree, being able to just get it for free. There's a lot of people out there that I think could have been like, the next Einstein, but because of social situations weren't able to get there. So that's, I don't know, that maybe that's a little too deep for this, but that's kind of my go-to is that, and the reason I'm saying that is that I try very hard and I'm not always successful at it. If you're starting a company, sharing your knowledge sometimes is hard, but I try to share everything I know with anybody unreservedly, because who knows how that could turn the tail, or that it could solve a problem somewhere down the road that might help humanity, kind of thing.
Yeah. And I think one of my mentors has said something very similar that has stuck with me, which is the knowledge doesn't care where you got it. And I would say that has always like, I didn't graduate engineering school. Like, I went the liberal arts route, and we've, kind of ended up in the similar place, which again, that proving the idea that, it's the knowledge is out there and it's there for you to get it. And the end result is really what matters.
Absolutely. If I may tack onto there, that's I went through a period of pretty intense burnout a while ago, and I was mostly I got really into drawing and writing for fandoms, which is it's the most cringe stuff you've ever seen. But I suddenly was like getting a bunch of practice in on using like a stylus with Procreate and stuff, and I think that's really helped me with Nomad, is like figuring out the nice overlay on the screen and like the tip on the stylus, and it makes it so much of a nicer experience that I feel like if I hadn't had that, honestly, I'm still a little bit in it, but the super cringe period, it helps me with the actual stuff I want to build too.
Don't say cringe though. Let's go back to the take some of that stuff and offer it up to somebody. Be vulnerable and
Yeah.
ask them what they think, because you might say cringe and somebody else is like, oh my God, this is like Da Vinci level, right?
I probably shouldn't say this, but it is actually on the internet. It's just extremely anonymized. So I'm putting it into
Okay,
the
I'm going to start
community,
looking. Challenge accepted.
Yeah.
You just can't take the urge to share and document out of, I think, any of us, honestly. And it's a beautiful thing. The knowledge wants to be free, like you're saying. What was it exactly? I wrote it down. Imagine if knowledge was shared and not sold. I think that you're both making amazing contributions there. Thank you so much for joining us, and everyone for
Anytime.
being in the audience today.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Yep.
Cheers. All right, everybody, have an awesome rest of your day. What a pleasure. This is so good. Yeah, hack on.